And so far in 2024, Aaron Glenn is knocking it out the park. But it wasn't too long ago that a lot of you were complaining about Aaron Glenn, asking for his head to roll. And look, coming off the most winningest season in franchise history for the Detroit Lions, there just are not a whole lot of hot seats left in Allen Park right now, especially for the coaching staff. But after years of being lauded for trying to make, well, lemonade with a really bad roster and no lemons, excuses have now run out for Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, or at least so you thought. Now, many of you listening, and you know who you are, did nothing but throw Aaron Glenn under a bus every single opportunity you could, and said no matter what personnel he was going to work with, Aaron Glenn was just not a good defensive coordinator. This was a no excuse season, and he just needed to go. Well,
you sure about that? You sure about
I don't know if I'm so sure about that. And he's hugely popular with players, not only in Allen Park, but around the league. His units, they have performed very well in seasons past, just not so much while you're rebuilding an entire team with the Detroit Lions. Now that the Lions have finally invested heavily on both sides of the ball, really, but especially on the defense, including spending their top 2 draft picks on cornerbacks this season, and after signing another one in free agency and trading for yet another one with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the time to produce has really arrived. I mean, this is the season that I, for one, expected it. And if they're going to continue to be held back by their defense, the fingers will start to point everything at Aaron Glenn. That is a quote. Not sure where it came from, but that is a quote. And there is no question, without the right personnel, AG couldn't do what he wanted to do. I always felt that AG was missing the right interior pressure. Clearly, he was. Corners that could cover, both in man and in press. The Lions just didn't have it. And having the ability to run multiple combo schemes on the same defensive play was something that was non-existent for Detroit. But every other team around us seemed to be able to pull it off. Something that great defenses really do is disguise the scheme within the base front that you're in, and then they execute at the snap into something totally different to confuse offenses. And again, that is something that the Detroit Lions just were not able to do. It's something that Aaron Glenn could not afford to do, given the personnel choices that he ended up with. Now, through 3 seasons, with Aaron Glenn at the helm, the Lions never had the opportunity to run his style of defense. We always really envisioned him, to run what he would. I guess we always envisioned what he was going to run based on his history, right? More of a man press, really aggressive style of defense. You're firing ends quite often, but you got the back end help to kind of bail you out. And even though he tried to run that defense at times, we got burned all the time. And last season, man, that was a season where we got burned quite often. They let up a lot of yards over the middle. But was it Aaron Glenn's fault? Sure, you could probably say it was his fault for calling the plays. But what else is he supposed to do? You have to run the defense. You just can't sit and prevent all day. So you do what you can do. This is the redemption period for Aaron Glenn. From criticism, now, he's on top of the mountain at this moment, 3 weeks into the season. Is it going to last? That's the biggest question. I'll ask you guys in the chat right now. You tell me, is Aaron Glenn's system in 2024, is it going to last throughout the playoffs? Is Aaron Glenn going to have this type of success for the next, 18 games of the season, 18 more games of the season, I think is what we need to win a Super Bowl? We'll find out. So for the past 2 seasons, though, Aaron Glenn has faced intense scrutiny from fans, from journalists, well, even some YouTubers that just don't understand how football, financials, and free agency really works in the NFL, or at the very least have a basic understanding of how it should work together if you want to build a team that is going to have sustained success. And I think that's what Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and Sheila Hamp and Mike Disner and Chris Spielman and a whole host of other members of this team set out to do. They wanted to build a team that just didn't win now. If you want to go out and win right now, you can go spend all of your money, go out and buy a team, Chicago, and go try to win. But it's just not going to happen, Chicago, 0-3 to start the season. Sorry. I don't know where that came from. But let's just take a trip down memory lane. Take a look at where this defense has been, where it came from, where it's going. What should we expect? Where is it at today? You pick one. That's what we're going to talk about. 2021. First season with the new coaching staff, going through the growing pains, of course, of creating a new roster, a new identity, building a culture, New coaches, new GM, new city, new fans. Tough fans. Loyal fans, but tough. The Lions started out with the second youngest roster, 25.2 years old in 2021. That's the stat. And that was after the draft. And there is no doubt that the Detroit Lions struggled mightily in 2021. Mightily is probably an understatement. But what many didn't understand is this was not a retooling. This was not a rebuild. It was a brand new project for the brand new Detroit Lions from the ground up. As I always say, they were taking it from the mud and they started resurrecting something new. Now, everything had to go, and it was not going to be until the fourth draft that I felt that this could really start to be accomplished. And I said it for the last season and a half, that it was going to be the fourth season, that the Lions were still half a season ahead of themselves. That was something I said all last year about week 7, week 8, and on, that we are a half a season ahead. We needed one more draft. We needed the interior pressure. We needed the cornerbacks. Now we have them. The Lions finished dead last in 3 out of 5 metrics analyzed by PFF: run defense, tackling, and overall defense in 2021, ranking 31st in coverage and points allowed on the season, 32nd in net yards per pass attempt allowed, 28th in pass rush, and 21st in yards per carry allowed. Nobody would argue that the Lions inherited a roster that was nothing more than a toxic wasteland of ex-Patriots players and bloated contracts for players like Justin Coleman or Desmond Trufant, bunch of dead cap from Trey Flowers, a lot of injured contracts that were still part of the team, with an overwhelming number of dead contracts. Look, Brad Holmes was really restricted, I guess is the best way to put it. He was restricted. He didn't have any free money just to go out and, spend openly. So he really couldn't do much in free agency. Not that he would have anyway, because that's just not his style, as we have learned. Now, Brad Holmes drafted really well, but little did we know, or little did the fans know, I mean, myself included, right? Just how well it was going to be, how good it was going to be until much later. And we're still questioning 2021 a little bit. Now, the Lions suffering ensued from a mass amount of injuries in 2021. I mean, we pretty much lost everybody right at the beginning of the season, it seemed like. A lot of the free agents, wide receivers, I mean, the offense was decimated. Defense, too. You really can chalk this one up to the Lions did what they could to survive that season. That's what 2021 was. Just kind of survive, get through it, get to the next draft. Keep rebuilding, keep retooling, keep adding on, right? You've already gotten out of the mud. You've kind of put the base frame and foundation and stuff in. Now you got to go up a couple levels. Now imagine for a moment that players like Amani Oruwariye, Tracy Walker, and Charles Harris were the standouts of the 2021 team. Standouts. Those were the best players we had on this team defensively. Are you kidding me right now? What a gut punch. It's not saying a whole lot, is it? AG and Dan Campbell utilized that season as best they could. They installed a bunch of young players. They kind of had to, right? They installed them into the lineup. They kind of had to. It was kind of by design and out of necessity. They didn't really have a choice. And while many of them displayed, the struggles you would expect from a rookie or a young and inexperienced team and player, I think a lot of people would identify the fact that there was a level of improvement, for that season and those players. It was good to see. You could tell that there should be a lot of credit given to Dan Campbell and his coaching staff for their developmental skills, the nurturing process, right? Taking these really young men and trying to turn them into a little bit older of a young man, if you catch what I'm saying here. But a lot of that falls on defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, too, for the defense and what he was able to do with his defensive players. Now, Glenn was given 4 draft picks in 2021 to kickstart the rebuild. Levi Onwuzurike, Ali McNeil, Ifeatu Melifonwu, and Derek Barnes. Now, to his credit, Levi O had a mild season that year, playing in about 20% of the snaps, had 1 sack. Ali McNeil was much of the same, roughly 25% of the snaps, and 2 sacks. And Ifeatu Melifonwu saw action in about 6 games and played sparingly, when dressed, at least for the game, because often he was not. He was a healthy scratch. Now, Barnes was the only drafted player that had a little bit more opportunity, playing in roughly 30 to 33% of the snaps that season. Wild season, rough season, right? Let's move on to 22. At the start of 2022, once again, the Lions began the year with the second youngest roster, again, 25.2 years old. This, of course, is after the 53-man cuts. is when you kind of take, ownership, I guess, of the age of your team. On October 26th, though, the Lions just dropped 1-5 after a 24-6 loss at the Dallas Cowboys. Week 6, critics really began questioning the leadership of this team and the new regime, Sheila Hamp. Following what was a very clumsy, pathetic performance against Dallas, Sheila addressed the fan base through the media in what was a gathering at Allen Park about 3 days after. And she admitted that she was frustrated. She was frustrated with the team's 4-game losing streak. She was frustrated with the way that the team was, not better, than where it was at that moment. But she continued to maintain faith in Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and that they were the right people and that nothing was going to change right now. And that these were the right two to lead this franchise going forward. This was a time when fans were asking for Dan Campbell to be fired and Brad Holmes to be fired because they thought in one season and 6 games that you were going to turn this franchise around into a winner. Are we serious? Hold on.
You sure about that? You sure about
Tell
that?
me how many
You sure about
teams
that?
have taken a roster as bad as the one that we inherited from Patricia and Quinn and turned it into a winning team in a year and a half or less. Does not happen. A retooling? Maybe, but you're going to have a lot of good players and a lot of money to spend. Lions didn't have either. Fans get too ingrained into this immediate gratification. Got to have it now. Why? Because we've never had it. We've never had it up until this point. So I understand it. We want a winner. And Dan Campbell, man, he got all of us amped up. It's his fault. He got all of us going. So, you also have to give a lot of credit to, the coaching staff and all the decisions that were made at that time to keep everybody, at that 1-6 or 1-5 point in the 2022 season. I mean, they could have fired Aaron Glenn at that point, right? Could have. What would have been? But what they did do the next week, sometime around Halloween, actually it was Halloween morning, after losing a 5th consecutive game to fall to 1-6, Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, they knew that this team needed to shake up, and it was a 31-27 loss to Miami, where Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill torched the Lions. I mean, just torched. They lit the entire field on fire. That secondary got eaten alive, 294 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns on 20 receptions. Crazy numbers. And sources in the locker room said that, players really respected the defensive backs coach, Aubrey Pleasant, but he was fired. That he had a really infectious personality, right? Ability to relate with the team. But defensively, something wasn't right. And the team was allowing the league's worst 32.1 yards or 32.1 points per game. And the secondary was obviously the biggest issue and has always been the biggest issue on this team. Since day one, the secondary has been the worst part of this team. Remember that. November 3rd, players only meeting was called. So a couple of days after the loss, 4 days after firing Pleasant and also trading Hawkinson, members of the Lions defense led by then veteran defensive tackle Michael Brockers held a players only meeting at Allen Park practice facility. And here was a couple of quotes that came out of that meeting. More than anything, I feel like every team needs that transparent, tough love on each other. A lot of guys were able to speak up, like, this is how I feel, this is my vision, and collectively, this is our vision moving forward. And that was from Lions cornerback Will Harris, of all people, told ESPN. The coaches got their hands full, with the game plan and stuff, so we've got to have our chemistry right as players. So that's pretty much what that meeting was all about, was us solidifying that chemistry within us and how we see ourselves and how we are trying to change the narrative moving forward. So they're trying to stick a stake in the ground, right? They're trying to move forward. The defense went on to play its best game of the season in a 15-9 tight win victory over the Green Bay Packers at Ford Field. In a game where, the unit really made, the defensive backs unit, they really made the game difficult for Aaron Rodgers, who threw 2 of his 3 interceptions on the day in the red zone, an area where the Detroit Lions struggled the entire season. The first time in his career that Aaron Rodgers had ever done that. Now, for Detroit, it was our second win of the season. We snapped an NFL longest active streak of 5 at the time, 5 games losing, right? And it was the catalyst for what was going to be a very strong finish. The Lions would go on to win 7 of their final 8 games that season, with, in my opinion, the biggest of games in Week 18 at Lambeau, knocking Green Bay out of the playoffs with a strong defensive performance in what was an utterly cold and miserable game where they could have just rolled over and went home. But they didn't. They stuck up for their coach. They stuck up for Aaron Glenn, and they went out and played some ball. That's a team. That's our team right now. And this is about Aaron Glenn, but I'm giving you guys the background, right? So for this unit's efforts, defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn was awarded the game ball during the post-game celebration in the locker room. He had this to say: "It was shocking, to be honest with you, and I guess shocking because for a defensive coordinator to get a game ball, I was appreciative. But I'll tell you what, I was really more appreciative of the players than anything else because it shows that that belief that they have, and not only me, but as a defensive staff. But man, all the credit goes to those guys." That was from Aaron Glenn. The love, the admiration, and the respect for AG was clear. And the players respected him as a person and a coach. If you were getting, the point by now, the theme to this video is sometimes there is more to the underlying story than what meets the eye or is retained in the memory banks. We kind of forget, things as they go on, but the one thing you don't forget is the narrative maybe that you started. If we don't go back and look at history every once in a while, well, it kind of gets tainted, right? With short-sighted views of reality and just thinking that Aaron Glenn has always been a disaster. He came into this team as a disaster. This whole team was a disaster. He's done nothing but try to help fix it. So what did we learn about the Lions defense? So, overall, the defense only improved 3 spots that season in 2022, but that number would fool you. Like I said, if you don't go back and look at history, going from 32nd to 29th, you'd be like, yeah, they didn't do anything. The defense sucked. They were terrible. But hold on a second. You didn't look deep enough. So at the time, the Lions were the worst team in the league with a 1-6 record. The defense was allowing, get this, 35 points per game, ranked 32nd in the league. 25 first downs per game, 32nd in the league. 154.8 rushing yards per game, 30th in the league. 5.14 yards per carry, 30th in the league. 8.24 yards per pass attempt allowed, 32nd in the league. 73.1 red zone TD percentage, 32nd in the league. 50.6 third down conversion percentage, 32nd in the league. 266.4 passing yards per game, 30th in the league. And 6 takeaways in 7 games, 30th in the league. You combine it all together, the Lions averaged 31st in the league in all metrics that mattered. But at the turn of the season, the Lions defense was one of the best in the league in 2022. Get this. Points per game dropped all the way from 35 to 20.3, ranked 11th. First downs was 25 per game, all the way down to 21.3. Now, they only moved down to 24th, but hey, I'll take 8 spots any day. Yards per carry, 3.8 yards per carry, tied for third all the way from 30th, 27 spots. Average yards an attempt, 6.9, tied for 21st all the way from 32nd. So again, another 11 points. They moved up. Passing yards per game didn't change a whole lot, 259. That was good for 30th, but rushing yards per game dropped all the way down to 122.3, good enough for 19th in the league. And they are still terrible on third down conversion. But when you look at the totality, they went from a worst to a top 15. And the majority of the metrics, pretty damn good defense. Now, that's pretty solid improvement. Notably in the red zone, though, or in the run defense. But it's not necessarily, the corner turning improvement that we've seen in Detroit, right? The real edge comes from these 2 key metrics. Red zone TD percentage, 55%, moved all the way down from 16th, or from 32nd to 16th. Takeaways, they had 7 in the first 6 in the first 7 games. They had 11 in 6 games, an average of 1.84 per game, which was tied for first. Pretty incredible movement. 2023, the Lions entered this season again with the 11th youngest roster, age 25.7. It's kind of nuts that only half of a year moves you from 2nd to 11th. Your average NFL team's pretty young. Average is about 25, 26 years old. Here's a quote, or actually a statement, I should say. The Lions defense made a statement in week 1 at Kansas City, marching in to Kansas City to beat the then Super Bowl champions in their own home in a very tight game and a good defensive performance. The defense posted 7 sacks twice in the past 5 games during their run in 2023. These are just some of the quotes of the season, some of the statements, the stats, something that Detroit had not done since 2014. Kirby Joseph was a second-year safety, had 4 interceptions. The second straight season, he's had at least 4 interceptions. Ifeatu Melifonwu, after moving from cornerback to safety and finally getting healthy, had a big impact down the stretch of the season and was finally healthy to play after roughly 3 seasons, right? Brian Branch. Brian Branch was a rookie with an impact play percentage of 7.1% of his defensive snaps. Not only that he was one of the highest graded DBs in the league last season, but he was a rookie to do it. Alex Anzalone had his best season of his career. Aleem McNeil was a top 10 interior defensive lineman. So when I said, remember, in 2021, when we brought these guys in, Aleem McNeil, Ifeatu Melifonwu, right? We didn't know who they were. We had no idea what they were going to be. And to just give it a moment. Because in 2023, they started to finally come alive. It now is taking until 2024 to see Levi finally, sprout wings and fly a little bit. The Lions still have not allowed a running back to go for, till today, they still have not allowed a running back to go for 100 plus yards since December 24th, 2022. Pretty incredible. Those are just some of the accomplishments, accolades from 2023. There's a ton more, but I'm not going to cover it all in this video. You cannot say that Aaron Glenn hasn't had a patchwork defensive back room for the first 3 seasons, because he has. Brad Holmes attempted to fix the issue in 2023, bringing in Emmanuel Mosley, CJ Gardner, and Cam Sutton. Obviously, none of it worked out. But you cannot blame Aaron Glenn for those deficiencies. Deficiencies of players and personnel, you can't blame him for that. He was given, and ultimately, what he was given was ultimately gone due to injury, and it affected, 2 of the starters with just 2 games that year. CJ Gardner was out by game 2, and Emmanuel Mosley came back for, 3-4 snaps, and he was out in week 5. It's not his fault. Now, here we are in 2024. Average age of this team, 25.6 years old. Good for 22nd in the league. Well, finally, in 2024, the Lions are doing exactly what I predicted they would. This offseason, I said that they needed to shore up the interior defensive line. I was hoping they were going to draft somebody. They didn't. They got DJ Reader instead. And that they also needed to draft and pick up free agents for the DB room, and they did. We finally brought in some competent players, right? Some players that can play at a high level. So now they've given AG 2 rookies and 2 veterans for his DB room, and they're finally starting to assemble a really good defense. And they kicked Brian Branch back to safety, which is a natural fit for him. Clearly, he's already having an impact. And then there was the hiring of Terrell Williams, which in my opinion was very essential. It was needed. It was needed for the growth of this defense, and also a much needed hiring now that AG, should he continue to have the season he is, he's gone next year. And Terrell Williams is going to end up having a coaching vacancy in front of him for defensive coordinator, which gives him a shot. Thankfully, they forecasted that Aaron Glenn was finally going to be able to do something this year, and they've got him set up with a replacement, assuming Terrell Williams wants to stick around. Now, the defense has gone from a mid-tier defense in 2023, right? They came from the bottom in 21, still at the bottom in 22, a mid defense in 2023, to now they're at the top. They are leading in a ton of different categories and metrics. It's now a unit that can carry this team when the offense is having its struggles, which we've already seen through the first 3 weeks. This offense is struggling. And if it wasn't for the defense at times, we would have lost every game. And I cannot ignore the fact that some people have even blamed Brad Holmes for not spending buckets and buckets of money on expensive defensive ends. And to that end, some of those individuals, they have now seen what interior pressure and discipline, on the ends means to a defense. You can't just have pass rushers going crazy every play. You can't. It doesn't work. But it also, what it means to have defense and interior pressure win a game without buckets of sacks. You've now seen that too. Because you've also seen us lose a game with buckets of sacks. So it goes both ways. Just targeting sacks is not going to get you wins. You have to target discipline. You have to have the right makeup, the right people, the right teachers, the right players. Most importantly, the right coaches. Sacks are great. They're a great equalizer, but they are not necessary or a necessary commodity to win games, especially against the dynamic and dual threat quarterback like we just saw in Kyler Murray this weekend. The Lions just proved my point hand over hand that the sheer need or want of an expensive defensive end is just flat out ridiculous. and clearly a misguided approach to building a strong defense. Sure, right? You need to have one game wrecker. You don't need multiple. You need to have one solid defensive end that can do the dirty work. You need to have one solid defensive end that can rush the passer. But then you need to have a couple of really good interior defensive linemen that can just blow it all up. And that's what they're doing right now, and that's why they're having success. It also proves that Aaron Glenn so far has not been the total issue, right? He has not been the only reason why this defense had some issues, through his first 3 seasons as a Lion. I won't excuse the poor play calling at times, and yes, I do believe that he has had some very piss poor play calling at times, but maybe we also need to understand that some players may be battling injuries that we just don't know about. We hear about it now all the time, after the fact. And, what we perceive as a poor play call, well, maybe it's just those players playing at their outer limits. And they can't do it physically. They just can't. Maybe the defense is limited that day, but they're in there playing, giving it everything they have. But be that as it may, many were calling for Aaron Glenn's job, exclaiming that 2024 was the season of underline no excuses. And so far through 2024, the Lions have benefited from a resurgence of this defense in large part because of Aaron Glenn and the style of defense that he likes on the field, which is aggressive, intimidating, vicious, violent, but smart and disciplined. The Detroit Lions are currently sitting atop the rankings in many areas, including this: first in tackling, second in run defense. For the 3rd season in a row, they're somewhere around the top 5. 16th in completion percentage, to name a few. Your Detroit Lions are well on their way right now, but here's the one thing I want to point out. 2021, the Lions were 31st in coverage. They were 16th in 2022. They dropped back to 30th in 2023, and now they're all the way back up to 20th in 2024. Pass rush. In 2021, they were 28th. In 2022, they were 19th. In 2023, they were 19th. And in 2024, they are now 3rd. In 2021, tackling was 32nd. In 2022, tackling was 11th, and then 28th in 23, and now 1st in 2024. Run defense, 32nd in 2021, 24th in 2022, 6th in 2023, and now 2nd in 2024. Overall defense, and I know there's a lot more metrics, 32nd in 2021, 29th in 2022, 22nd in 2023, and now 3rd in 2024. I think Aaron Glenn has had a very positive impact on this team. Yes, we've had to fire 4 or 5 coaches, 2 DB coaches, a defensive line coach, and a defensive line coach left us. And that was Todd Wash at the very beginning of all this. And we lost a few players, after a fairly successful run, or end of 2022 season. But now we have all the key pieces, and now we also have a lot of injuries. So what are we going to say now if we drop some games due to defense because of all these injuries? Is it Aaron Glenn's fault? I don't think so. Because now I think you've seen what Aaron Glenn can do when he has the pieces that he needs. You can't play chess without a full chessboard. You need all of your pawns. Aaron Glenn needs a complement of defensive players to be able to run the defense that he knows will work. And we've already seen it work for 3 weeks in a row. Just the offense couldn't do their part in some of the games. Thankfully, we pulled 2 wins down. Aaron Glenn is no longer on the hot seat. Never was. It is cold on his ass today because he's doing just fine. Go One Pride, go Detroit Lions. You guys take care. Have a great one.